Olá, sejam bem-vindos e bem-vindas a este episódio especial do Dar Voz ao esQrever. O meu nome é Diogo Pereira e hoje proponho-vos descobrir o que se faz de política LGBTI na União Europeia, passando pelo caminho que ainda temos a percorrer para atingir a igualdade, mas também o muito que já foi alcançado. Falo-vos diretamente da capital da Europa e vou ter comigo a Eurodeputada alemã Terry Reintke. A nossa conversa foi em inglês e o áudio que vão ouvir não tem interpretação para português. Podem encontrar um resumo da entrevista no site esQrever.com. Terry Reintke é eurodeputada pelos Verdes desde 2014, a altura que foi eleita pela primeira vez. É desde então uma das mais sonantes vozes em defesa e promoção dos direitos LGBTI e igualdade dentro do Parlamento Europeu. Desde 2019 é co-presidente do Intergrupo LGBTI do Parlamento Europeu. Este é um grupo informal com mais de 150 membros que se comprometeram a trazer a discussão de assuntos LGBTI para o Parlamento Europeu. A mim parece-me que este tipo de compromisso e trabalho é cada vez mais crucial num cenário de sociedades mais divididas e onde muitos tentam fazer crer que os direitos humanos se discutem e que as pessoas queer podem ser invisibilizadas. Um exemplo disto são as chamadas zonas livres de ideologia LGBTI que apareceram na Polónia. Como resposta, o Parlamento Europeu declarou simbolicamente que toda a União Europeia era uma zona LGBTI livre. É também sobre estas tensões que vamos falar. E vamos agora mudar para a língua inglesa. Espero que gostem. Hello Terry, thank you very much for being here with us today. I want to start our conversation by talking a bit about your work at the European Parliament LGBTI Intergroup. This is an intergroup that keeps growing and has now over 150 members from different political quadrants. Can you explain us the importance for policy making of having such a group and what do you do?
Well, first of all, maybe speaking about the importance, why it makes sense to have an intergroup. As you said, we are really coming from a broad variety of different backgrounds. We come from all member states of the European Union and we come from all democratic political groups inside of the European Parliament. And as LGBTI issues are very horizontal issues, so basically they can refer to any part of politics. We felt that it should also be represented as forming a group or gathering of MEPs that can then bring in these different perspectives and also bring the LGBTI perspective back to all of these different fields. And it has proven to be very successful. A lot of MEPs want to take part. And I think that our work mainly consists of two strands. We do a lot of different things, but the first, and I would say also most important aspect of our work is obviously to influence the parliamentary work. So to have legislation, a more LGBTI friendly legislation, having LGBTI issues mentioned in the different political fields. But also, and that's very important for us, the second strand where we try to work very closely with the community, with civil society organizations, with different political actors, because we also see ourselves as maybe, if you want to call it that, a hub for bringing together the LGBTI community in Europe, because as we are the European Parliament, we are a very good place for that. So we have these two main areas. We do parliamentary work, and at the same time, we also really try to work with civil society and the community. And obviously, as you can imagine, these two things also overlap. So they're not mutually exclusive, but they very often go together.
And do you take a positive balance so far?
I would definitely say that we have been really successful. We have grown as an intergroup. We already exist now for over 20 years, so it's not a very new development, but we have grown. I would say we are also, when it comes to both legislation as well as communication, media work, if I can say that, most successful intergroup in the European Parliament. And I think that this is important, we have really grown in scope. So maybe we started, being very more from the left liberal part of the parliament. So a lot of Green MEPs, socialist MEPs, but now we also have more and more conservative MEPs who are taking part. And that's obviously what we want, because LGBTI issues don't belong to one political color, but they're really human rights. So they should also be addressed by all different democratic political groups.
And that's quite something, especially doing it for 20 years. You at the European Parliament LGBTI Intergroup, You seem to send a very strong message that, unfortunately, it has not yet been heard in countries like Portugal. And there is room for LGBTI people in politics. I think we can count with one hand the number of out-of-the-closet politicians in Portugal and in many other countries. What do you think it's missing in politics to have more openly queer politicians? And do you think having more openly queer people in elected offices would impact the advancement of LGBTI rights?
Absolutely. I think it is greatly important that there is representation of obviously the queer community also in politics and parliaments. But also I think that this question of visibility plays a very crucial role also for your first question, because the fact that they are out and proud politicians, but not only politicians, just public people in general, I think it encourages other people also to come out, and it strengthens the whole struggle for equality and diversity in society. Because I think when we as queer politicians tell our stories, when it becomes clear that we are also directly affected by, for example, certain rights issues, then I think it can help very much in fostering and advancing LGBTI rights as a whole. So I think it is of great importance. But one little thing, I mean, we are an intergroup with a lot of members from the queer community, but we have also always been very open for allies. So I think that the struggle for LGBTI rights obviously concerns the community the most, but it is an overall effort from the society that is needed to really build a society where everybody can live freely and equally and love who they love and be who they are.
Do you think there has been a generational change in politics and these views?
Absolutely. I mean, we have seen, and I think that we need to remind ourselves of this as well, a lot of progress from, let's say, 30, 40 years ago. If you look at the situation all across Europe, across the European Union, you can see that you have much more visible LGBTI politicians. Also in terms of rights, we have seen a lot of progress, notwithstanding, obviously, that right now we are facing a sort of backlash where there are attacks on LGBTI rights again, also across the European Union, unfortunately. But I think that there is a new wave, there is a new sort of also normality about queer people being in politics. And this, I think, is shown by the fact, for example, that you also have more and more conservative politicians that are coming out as queer. Because there you can clearly see that this really goes beyond just political positioning and really is maybe a new situation altogether.
Mm-hmm. I was looking through your website and I found a sentence that I think it's the perfect motto for the rest of our conversation. So you say, achievements we took for granted are subject to right-wing attacks these days. Opponents of democracy are trying to turn back time. I think you're totally correct. And this takes us to the inglorious LGBTI free zones in Poland. So in early March, the European Parliament voted a historic but yet symbolic resolution with the LGBTIQ freedom zone. And this is clearly a counter narrative in response to the LGBTI free zones in Poland. But is this enough? How can we defeat this growing populism and identity politics?
Well, it is obviously not enough, because we see these attacks. And I mean, by declaring the European Union as an LGBTIQ freedom zone, we by no means want to express that we believe that all LGBTI people in Europe can live freely and equally in the society. But we want to make this promise and this pledge to fight for a European Union where everybody can actually enjoy full rights. And this was a first step. It is, as you said, a very symbolic step, because there is no direct legislative consequence that it has. But because we see this backlash, we felt that there needs to be sort of a counter narrative pushed forward. And we now have actually things that I think are really showing that there can also be more progress made. Like, for example, last autumn, when the Commission presented the first ever LGBTIQ equality strategy for the European Union, there are legislative proposals coming up. And we as an intergroup want to already set the scene for this legislative work that is going to be done for the parliamentary work by saying we get in contact with people from all across the society, from all political levels, what can be done to promote LGBTI rights inside of the European Union and beyond. And this is why we wanted to make this declaration and hope that it also gives us a better access or a better communication basis for then having direct contact with people from the community all across the European Union.
And what has been the feedback of the community on this LGBTI freedom zone?
Well, I would say it has been largely positive. A lot of people felt that this was really needed. You know, I spoke to a lot of activists who said they really needed something that they can positively relate to because they hear all these horrible news, you know, obviously the community in Poland and Hungary, but also in other parts of Europe where people feel that, you know, you have these hate crimes, you have the news from the so-called LGBTI ideology-free zones in Poland, and that they really needed something, that there is also a sense of the Europeanness of the queer community. We had this action where people could post pictures of themselves holding banners saying LGBTIQ freedom zone. We really got pictures from all across Europe. And I think people really felt that they were part of something that is, you know, not only in their national reality, but that goes beyond that. And that I think was very powerful.
And that, as you were saying, it's the creation of a counter narrative. And do you think we, the European Union, can we actually export this kind of narrative as well?
Can we export it? I hope that we can inspire, you know, I hope that by really following these fundamental values like democracy, rule of law, fundamental rights that include LGBTI rights, because I mean, it's not that we ask for special rights, we just ask for exactly the same rights like other people in society, that by really living up to these values ourselves, we can sort of set a signal to the rest of the world to say, look, this is something that is very valuable, that is a very good basis for living together, for building a strong and resilient society. And by that, other than maybe exporting it, making people understand why these values are so important, actually not European, but universal, and why everybody in the world should be able to live in equality and freedom.
There has been a huge improvement in many member states that pursue a more equal agenda. But even though practices like the so-called conversion therapy are still not illegal in many EU countries. But at the same time, as you were mentioning, we see a growing regression of LGBTI safety and rights in many other countries. How can we deal with a European Union running at two different speeds when it comes to LGBTI equality?
Well, I think this is the challenge that we are facing right now, because obviously we see these kind of trends not exclusively between member states, because a lot of these things, they're happening within societies. So when you look, for example, at a country like Germany, where I come from, we have made very big steps towards more equality, for example, by legalizing same-sex marriage a couple of years ago, while at the same time, now we have a right-wing extremist party sitting in the German parliament again that is very strongly going against LGBTI rights. And I think the same is true for the European Union level. And obviously, we have the very clear cases of Hungary and Poland, where you have a government that is absolutely attacking fundamental rights, not only of the LGBTI community, but of minorities, of women, rule of law. And I think what we have to do is, as people who want to live in societies based on rule of law and fundamental rights, to build a movement that goes against that across borders. I think we have seen with the solidarity, for example, that was shown towards the Polish community, that this was very, very meaningful also to the debate in Poland. And I think that we need to remind ourselves again and again that obviously we are much stronger together. I think also when you look at the past, how did we actually get to this point? How did we manage to be successful in the struggle for our rights? It was very often this cross-border and also cross, community solidarity that really made that possible. And I hope that we can learn from that and really push that also for the future.
I understand and agree on the role communities and inspiring people to act can have. Then my question would be if there is still a role for these more progressive countries to inspire others and their communities.
Absolutely. I think it's obviously on us as a community and on civil society to set the scene and, to push for certain changes. But then in the end, you can also really see that legislation matters. And we have seen that by setting positive examples, some more progressive member states could really create game changers in certain questions. And I hope that, for example, with the topic that you referred to, the so-called conversion therapy, where we have some member states that have already banned it, that they can also then create a little bit of what you might call a domino effect, that other member states are going to follow suit, because there is an ongoing debate about whether the European Union could actually push for a ban, because so far it's said to be really a national competence. But what I see, and I think that's what you are referring to, is that we have a very firm and loud group of member states, Poland and Hungary, but also some others who are going against forwarding LGBTI rights. Whereas on the other side, maybe there is not such an organized group of member states yet. And this is something that we really want to see change. And actually, one of the hopes that we had from the Portuguese presidency is that they would kind of push for this, that the Portuguese government would take that on and say, look, we need to, with regards to LGBTI issues, with regards to some other progressive issues, work closer together. I think we are not yet there, but this is certainly something that we have to keep reminding member states that, just saying, equality is very important. And then, going to the next agenda point is not how you actually defend fundamental rights. You have to actively promote, you have to have a strategy how we can counter this backlash and this attack on fundamental rights and democracy in the European Union.
And so I guess the Portuguese presidency didn't took up on these subjects. Probably also the next presidency will not do it.
We can be surprised, maybe Slovenia is suddenly going to become a beacon of the fight for LGBTI rights. You never know.
Let's hope, let's cross our fingers. I'll be very happy. So touching in a subject that you were talking, Hungary. So this is a country that is on the lead of the international anti-LGBTI movement, and the pandemic has been used as an excuse to undermine LGBTI rights and pursue even legal bannings, such, for example, the adoption by same-sex couples. I know this is a very tricky question now, but what tools or mechanisms can the European Union use to ensure the protection of LGBTI citizens, not only in Hungary, but across the Union?
Well, I think the first and most obvious, these attacks on fundamental rights are not standalone. As I said, they're not isolated. They are really part of a broader attack on liberal societies, on democracy and rule of law in countries like Hungary and Poland. And the most obvious thing, and that has already been done, is activating the Article 7 procedure against the respective countries. But as you know, it needs unanimity in Council to actually finalize this process. So it's going to be pretty unlikely that either of these procedures is actually going to be finalized. Still, they are important. Additionally, and this is something that the European Parliament has explicitly asked for, is that we want to use more infringement procedures against member states that are going against LGBTI rights. We have anti-discrimination legislation already in certain fields, for example, in the field of employment. And we would like to see that the European Commission is more proactive there and actually defends these laws that we already have. much more than they have been over the past month and years now. And a third point, and this has already been discussed, I think, for a while now as well, is the question of funding. And this goes both ways. We now have a conditionality for EU funding based on the rule of law. And there you can also take into consideration fundamental rights. I think this should definitely be used by the European Commission in the future for central governments that are infringing on fundamental rights and rule of law not to so easily distribute EU funding anymore. But it also goes the other way, because we also have in this new EU budget money foreseen for organizations, for example, that are cut from national funding very often, that are fighting for LGBTI rights, that are fighting for women's rights. And this kind of money to be then directly given from the European level, because in the past month and years, we have really seen that without a strong civil society and activists on the ground, it is very hard to counter these attacks and this backlash. So it's very important to support organizations, civil society in countries like Hungary and Poland as much as possible.
So you were mentioning this is not a standalone issue. There's a rule of law and many other subjects around this. So, but I would like to ask you, what do you think are the most pressing issues to address in order to achieve the said union of equality? And here I said equality in the full spectrum of the word.
How much time do we have? No, sorry. No, maybe I can bring up two issues because they're very prominent in this before mentioned LGBTIQ equality strategy that was presented by the European Commission last autumn. And I also think they are not only meaningful for LGBTI communities, but also for others. And I think most notably with the first example, and this is that hate crime on the basis of all forms of discrimination, so including also sexual orientation and gender identity, to become a crime on the EU list of crimes. And this would mean that the EU could actually legislate against it, because we see that there is a very wide variety of levels of how protected minorities, people with a migration background, racialized people with disabilities are from hate crimes. And here we could see that the European Union really takes a stance and creates more protection against hate crimes. So this would be a very important step, I think, for equality as a whole across the board, if you were to say so. And maybe one issue that is a little bit more specific for the LGBTI community, but can also benefit other people, I think, in the end, would be this proposal to have a mutual recognition of documents between member states. Because, for example, right now we have a situation where a married couple, same-sex couple that has children would move from a country like, let's say, Belgium to a country like Poland or Slovakia, would lose their legal status towards each other. And obviously that means that rainbow families, a lot of people from the community actually cannot fully enjoy freedom of movement. And this is something that has to change. And we hopefully still see a legislative proposal in this directive by the end of this year, which I think would be a really big step forward for the LGBTI community in the EU.
Okay. So I would like to end on a positive note. So what do you think are the most notable achievements in the fight for equality of the past years?
Again, how much time do we have? No, I'm joking. No, I think, we have seen a lot of legislative progress. We now have half of the member states of the European Union where equal marriage has been introduced. This was really like decades of fight from the community that made this possible. And I think we again and again have to say how grateful we can be for all of these fights. And then secondly, and this is because we talked about representation in the beginning, I think that today we have a number of member states, like, for example, Luxembourg, like Ireland, that already had heads of states that come from the community and that were very open about it, is something that we can see as a very great achievement. because I think it shows that, in the end, this is about people. This is not about an ideology. This is not about a cultural discussion. This is really about people living equal lives, and then also finally becoming prime ministers or whatever they want to be. And I think that that's really a great achievement, that we can also see people have fought for who they themselves could actually never benefit from it as much as they should have. And I think always a little bit of myself is, also standing on their shoulders in a way when fighting for LGBTI rights.
And you're right, this is about people, and this is a fight that we keep on having. And hopefully one day we won't, but so thank you very much, Terry, for this conversation. And I must say it is a pleasure to hear the views of a politician as yourself that actually fights for a better society. And for that, I thank you very much.
Thank you, it was my pleasure.
E voltamos ao português. Foi esta conversa com a Eurodeputada Terry Reintke, a quem agradeço as respostas e a simpatia. Gostaria também de agradecer ao Gabinete da Eurodeputada pela prontidão e disponibilidade e ao Secretariado do Intergrupo LGBTI do Parlamento Europeu por ter facilitado a organização desta entrevista. E claro, ao Pedro Nuno do esQrever pelo constante apoio. Espero que tenham gostado deste episódio especial do Dar Voz ao esQrever e fico à espera do vosso feedback para continuarmos a conversa. Mandem-nos um e-mail ou até um tweet. O meu nome é Diogo Pereira e até à próxima.